Hello, everyone. Welcome to this online briefing from the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, MECLA. Today, we're very excited to be collaborating with our friends and colleagues at ASBEC, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council. That's why they use the acronym ASBEC. They will brief us on, and the MECLA network, on the just released issues paper on embodied carbon emissions in Australia's built environment. My name is Hudson Worsley from Precinct, and I have the privilege of being the chair of MECLA and of hosting today's event. I'm joining you today from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous land around the country. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Turning to the mechanics of this session, we're recording this event for future reference. We've received 279 registrations, so a popular topic with our friends at ASBEC. Welcome to you all. It's a reminder this is a briefing, it's not a webinar, so please turn off your camera and mic, except for our speakers, of course. As always, I'd like to remind MECLA members and attendees today of our governance requirements. MECLA does not tolerate any anti-competitive behaviour. We operate in a pre-competition environment, and that's for all of our benefits. If you are aware of any conflicts of interest, please speak up and we will adjust accordingly. Please use the chat and Q&A, and we'll obviously do our best to field questions. Some of the panel may be able to answer as we go, and there'll be some links put forward to help you find the documents being discussed and the survey, which will be mentioned several times. Survey, keep your ears out. All right, today we are joined by three guests, all with deep experience in the built environment and the challenge of reducing emissions from our sector. Alison Scotland, Executive Director of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council. Alison, hello. Jeremy Mansfield, Mansfield Advisory Proprietary Limited and Project Director of the ASBEC Embodied Carbon Project. G'day, Jeremy. And Nicole Sullivan, Impact Director at ThinkStep ANZ. I love that title, Impact Director. It's not about reports, it's about impact. And she's leading the technical work around the Embodied Carbon Project. So that's who we will hear from. I'd like now to hand over to Alison with Jeremy and Nicole as well. This is a combined presentation, so I'll let the three of you tag team. I'll turn my microphone off. Please do keep an eye on the chat and questions as well. And then we'll come back towards the end for some discussion. All right, over to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hudson, and hello, everyone. Lovely to see you online. Really excited to share this with you today and potentially to help fuel the discussions. You have a QR code on the screen right now that gives you a link to the ASBEC webpage that has the issues paper, a supporting annex, and a bit of information. So please feel free to access your discussion paper and follow as we discuss what's in it today. But really excited. This is the first step in a project that we launched late last year. And it's really looking at how the building and construction industry can collaborate and seek help in achieving a common decarbonisation goal. And, you know, trying to look at realistic timeframes and expectations needed to bring about the transformation, noting that we have the wonderful MECLA brain repository to feed on. So firstly, I'll just recap a bit about who ASBEC is. So we are a collection of peak bodies across the Australian built environment sector, along with a range of government and academic observing members. The thing about ASBEC is when a range of different various peak bodies across the built environment sector agree on a common policy position, it can be really powerful. So noting all the amazing work that has, coalesced from MECLA over the years, we're now applying our consensus process to help define some priorities, some policy priorities for upfront embodied carbon to help supercharge the consistent measurement framework created by neighbours. So a bit about the project, while ASBEC is conducting this process, around developing some policy priorities, we are rooting it in and growing it from so much work that has gone before and work that many of you have been involved in and been a critical part of over the past couple of years. So the project is wonderfully funded and supported by the federal government and neighbours. And the ultimate goal of the project is to develop a comprehensive policy framework and help us figure out what we can do to scale neighbours' work. It will help us to put together some clear policy recommendations for all levels of government in Australia. With that in mind, consultation feedback is a critical step so you can help us to get it right. So this issues paper, we are presenting the issues as the 7 decarbonisation dilemmas. So they are problems that must be solved first to build momentum so that other changes can follow. And we want to test these dilemmas with you. So on the screen, we've got direction. That's related to, bringing lower carbon construction to the mainstream. Develop means, it's all about the building industry capacity to decarbonise and understand what needs to happen. Disclose, it's all about the methods, the data, the reporting, something MECLA's been all across for many years now. Demand, which is around clarity, consistency, which brings us into confidence. Design relates to the best decisions from concept to completion. Detail is about the best product options that we have. And deliver is around delivering these low carbon assets. So what I might do is I might pass over to Jeremy now to give you a bit of a briefing around what we mean when we're talking about carbon in the built environment.
Thanks, Alison. Nicole, next slide. It's important context to start with this in terms of the project's scope. And importantly, this issues paper is tackling upfront embodied carbon, the A1 to A5, and you can see there product to construction. That represents approximately 16% of all emissions generated from the built environment from products and materials used in construction and the process of delivering those projects. It's also aligned to the neighbours' embodied carbon measurement methodology. So just want to ground us in terms of why, in terms of the scope here and the impact that we're seeking to address. In the next slide, Nicole. It's important to recognise that we have been doing a lot of work on operational carbon, and that's because it is at the moment a much bigger part of the graph here, as you can see. However, we've been actually doing a lot of work in that space in terms of operational carbon work around renewables, efficiency, and the trajectory as identified, as you said at the earlier slide, but by 2050, 85% of it will actually be the embodied carbon legacy and challenge. Hence why it's important now to actually address tackling this piece, because it's not going in the same trajectory direction that operational carbon is. Nicole? The other really important context piece here is around the hierarchy. And we'll talk about this when it gets into some of the other dilemma type challenges and responses. But it's really important to flag that the opportunities are unsurprisingly best identified at the earliest onset in terms of that concept stage, or even do we even need a new build scenario to actually reduce the amount of carbon at the start of a project. So it's really important this hierarchy is informing the various things that we've identified in the dilemmas to make sure that are we testing and addressing the opportunity at the right stages to have the scale of impact that's possible, and it really brings into focus the opportunities for reuse and adaptation of buildings, and really going beyond the discussion around we're just going to try to replace material X with Y, and actually start to really look more deeper into some of the design decisions and other things that can be challenged earlier on in a project, and we'll get into that into the dilemmas. Thanks, Nicole. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. As part of developing our 7 decarbonisation dilemmas, we've actually put in a whole lot of research to really underpin how we came up with those dilemmas. So the way that we did that is we really wanted to first lean on what already exists. This is not about reinventing the wheel. We do want to build on what's happened before. And there was an enormous amount of industry consultation, particularly through Neighbours and Infrastructure Australia over the last couple of years. And all that we learnt from stakeholders has been brought into this project. We also used the Every Building Counts series of reports as a launch pad as we started to think about what policy should look like. And there was an enormous amount of desktop research that was done, looking at papers, policies, action plans, and so forth from Australia and around the world. We brought all that information together, but we had it shaped by our stakeholders. So as Jeremy pointed out, we're very aligned with the Neighbours Embodied Carbon Standard that's coming out, and the GBCA has provided strategic input alongside that. The Commonwealth DQ has also provided us not only funding, but really great engagement and direction as we head towards developing that comprehensive policy framework. We want to acknowledge and thank you, ASBEC, for coming to our webinar and responding to our survey in March, because that was actually critical to us pulling this information together. And also to thank our ASBEC working group, who through April and May put in the big effort to give us much more contribution there as well. When we looked at policies from around the world, you'll see at the bottom just a snippet out of something called the Carbon Leadership Forum Policy Map. And it's fascinating, and it was our prime source. Can I recommend you go have a look at that if you're interested in what is happening around the world? There is a link in the issues paper to that. But we looked at over 250 different policies and action plans from around the world. And in addition, we looked at another 34 research paper sources, and we went through those with a defined parameter set as well to really extract the key information that needs to inform what we're doing. We also narrowed down those 250 policies down to only 30. They're not the 30 only policies that are worth looking at. There's a wealth of information out there, but we picked 30 of the best sources that we felt that was out there across 11 countries. Just a quick look at the kind of things that you're going to find in the issues paper. We have an international policy overview. So this is the 11 countries and an overview of just some requirements that we found in those policies and how they might relate to us. We also, as we went through that parameter set with all of those research papers, what we've done is pulled out insights and takeaways from each one of those into these 4 pages of this kind of content. And importantly, we did have a good look at what's happening in Australia, both historically and what's happening now, and that's all laid out in there as well. There's just too much information that came from the research, and we just can't jam it into the 44 pages that are in the issues paper. So we have published an annex. So if you're a nerd like me and you want to get into the detail, there's plenty more there to be found. So have at it. There's another 50 odd pages there if you're interested in digging in deeper into what we've done. So all that research then came together and we pulled them up into our 7 decarbonisation dilemmas. And I'll hand back to Alison.
Thanks, Nicole. So this is the pivotal point. This is what we want to test with you. And we know that with your amazing MECLA brains and resources, you can help give us the insight that we need to help us shape the solutions to these dilemmas, but also, give us direction. We want you to help us understand which of the options are going to give us the most transformative results. We're all about impact here. So, there's a lot of stuff that can happen, but we want to really focus on, what can give us the most impact for upfront embodied carbon now, noting that there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the medium to long term. But we want you to tell us what we've missed. We want you to help us understand what solutions are going to give us the best bang for buck, have the best ability to implement, and what time frame could these solutions be achieved by. And so with that in mind, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each of our decarbonisation dilemmas. So you'll see direction up there on the screen. I'm not going to repeat what's on the screen there, but I want to give you an idea about the types of solutions that we're looking at, and we want your feedback on in relation to what needs to happen in terms of direction. Now, from an Every Building Counts point of view, we had this very clear understanding that government needs to lead by example in many ways. They have clear policies, especially in the built environment via the National Construction Code that can be used in terms of levers. We also have government as asset owners can give very clear signals in relation to the need for low carbon materials. So you'll see some of the possible solutions up there. We want you to tell us what you think will give us the biggest amount of impact. We want to understand, how we can collaborate together, how government can really lead, but also industry can lead. And we've got the lived example through MECLA. So give us your insights to help us shape what needs to happen in terms of direction, both short term and then the longer or medium term and longer term. In relation to develop, this is about capacity building. We really understand and recognize that, we're speaking to the leaders here within MECLA. What's it going to take to really bring the whole industry up to speed, understanding what we mean by upfront embodied carbon, how to use the neighbours tool that they've released, or the pilot was released last Friday at the neighbours conference. So types of solutions that we're wanting your insight on in relation to the capacity building stuff is about, what do we do to develop capacity? We know that there's some great examples out there in the industry already about capacity building. What do we do to supercharge that? How do we have the building sector collaborating across the value chain to understand that everyone knows what to do in relation to decision makings around upfront embodied carbon? We also recognise that there's so much amazing work out there in the industry and in Australia and globally. So how do we take that amazing information and really apply it consistently across the country? And it's all about understanding what the role is and to train the trainer. How do we get the understanding of EPDs, environmental product declarations, across the sector and across our value chain? And Nicole, I'll pass on to you.
Thank you. The third dilemma that we face is around disclosure. We can only manage down what we reliably and credibly measure. And so this is about looking for nationally having a consistent measurement framework with credible and comparable data for products and materials. And when we talk about reporting, we want to make sure that reporting supports progress and decision making rather than reporting for reporting's sake. And as we're doing this, we always need to make sure that it is being mindful of trade-offs, because while carbon is very important, it is definitely not the only thing that we need to consider. So some possible solutions that we need your feedback on. So national standard developed methods for reporting. And so we see both Neighbours and Infrastructure New South Wales, which is now leaning into the national context, have really been working on that so far. We need support for EPD development so we can get more product data out there. We really want to see a national database for approved product carbon footprint data. We want to make the choice to do good things faster and easier. And there's a need to standardise bills of quantities so that we can get asset level measurement happening much more productively. And with that, over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Nicole. Well, I think demand is one of our key dilemmas, because without that clear signal and clarity and being consistent around the approach, then the industry just doesn't have the confidence to invest, to support and deliver on the opportunities in this space. So it's really a key dilemma in my perspective on that. In terms of some of the solutions that we see, it actually goes to the point, if you want to go to the next page, Nicole. It really kind of highlights a number of areas around clear kind of model clauses or transparency models, or things that provide clarity on approaches to the industry. It also identifies example solutions of commitments, whether that be the MECLA pledge, whether it be the C40 cities commitment that has both fossil fuel free construction and embodied carbon commitments on some of the world's global cities. But it's also identifying confidence building opportunities and supporting the businesses actually investing in these low embodied carbon products, and the kinds of incentive schemes and fiscal incentives to actually support that transition. Interestingly, we identified opportunities to maybe do things at a different scale. So the setting up of materials carbon scheme for detached residential housing is one of those examples. Can we actually establish a carbon mark that everybody going to Bunnings is actually supplying a product that actually recognises low embodied carbon materials, rather than trying to tackle it at the individual builder level? And so have it at the impact at the scale of the potential demand of the entire sector, rather than being left to the individual project opportunity. In terms of the next one, on design, as I said before, around the decarbonisation hierarchy, we really need to start at the beginning to make sure that we're really testing the opportunities that actually present themselves as a design solution. Whilst we can save 20, 30%, 20, 25% typically on a low embodied carbon concrete design, if we can get the structural optimization done early on, then we can save a similar amount in just structural design efficiency. So there are things to be doing very early on. Again, if we're actually have the opportunity of adapting and retrofitting an existing building rather than having to create the entire resource of building a new structure, then we're actually having a significant impact in reducing our build less and actually build smarter approach. The value engineering process is an important process, but where is the opportunity to involve the value of low embodied carbon in those exercises? Equally, we need the kind of incentives for the industry to actually respond to actually identify opportunities to innovate and have a look at those opportunities at the right time in a project to enable them to be implemented. And I think back over to one of you.
To me. Our sixth dilemma, and Jeremy, I don't want to compete, but honestly, as a former manufacturer, we've got to get the products right, and we've got to be able to bring the products in. So I'm sorry, but I think this is probably one of the most important we've got. We need to make sure the best product options, well, firstly, that we know about them. Secondly, that we know enough to trust them. And thirdly, they actually need to be properly available on the market for us all. And we need to make sure that industry is working to create better options. So decarbonising the manufacturing that's happening now, enabling newer offers to come into the market, making sure that we are also embedding the circular economy in everything that we're doing, and getting better construction options available to us. And of course, designing out waste really needs to be a key thing. Waste is not a word anymore. Waste is just a resource that's not used properly into the future. We also need to make sure that our standard specifications and contract models do support adoption of new products, and that the products have great and trustworthy data behind them. There are a whole raft of possible solutions here, and I'm not going to go through each one of them with you because there are 11, and no doubt you will have more ideas as well. Every one of these solutions that we're putting in front of you, as well as the challenges for each dilemma, are all mapped out in the issues paper. So please go read it. If you don't quite know what we mean by these, there is a little section on each of them. Take a look. Tell us through the survey, what do you think? What are these priorities that we need to do? Because if we try to do all of these, we'll end up doing them badly. We need to know what's most important for us to do. And with that, I'll hand back to Jeremy.
Well, at the end of the day, it's all about delivering these outcomes on real projects. And so this is our point on the dilemma here, to make sure that it's visible, that it's actually evident that it's been planned to actually succeed and deliver those outcomes from the outset. And by actually establishing those pilots and developing more case studies to help other organisations get confidence, then we can see that organisation and government and industry are both being responsible and stepping up to the plate to deliver on those outcomes. So our solutions here really flag and reflect on these around being more visible, being more obvious that commitments are in place, mandating and expecting to reward that decarbonisation outcomes, applying the new NABERS embodied carbon tool for buildings, or equally applying the New South Wales Government's embodied carbon and infrastructure measurement tool that is now being broadly adopted across the infrastructure space. And really, again, to build confidence around benchmarking and methods by which others can be compared. Those library case studies that MECLA have are so important for help to others to learn from. We need that at a much broader scale to help others understand what the opportunities are out there. And lastly, I know, acknowledging James Stewart, you asked the question about the value of carbon. We certainly identified that as an opportunity. Infrastructure Australia has established values and a methodology. We don't have a carbon border adjustment mechanism that I know Carlos would love us to have, but the value of carbon needs to be brought into the business case decision making and valued in the process. And by doing so, then we can deliver on these outcomes for lower carbon assets. So with that, I will hand back to Alison.
And this is just another plug and reviewing of the QR code if you missed it at the beginning of the presentation. But really, you know, this is all about you. You are our embodied carbon nerds. So we want to hear your feedback. What is missing? What you know, we've tried to capture as much research and as much content from the processes that have led to here, but tell us if there are any glaring gaps. What else do you think? And I'm seeing some fabulous ideas in the chat. You know, what else can be considered as part of this process? Noting that we are looking at upfront embodied carbon first, because we know that this is something the built environment can do now. We also know what the future goal is, and how do we embed this consideration as part of a cultural shift that will get us towards a proper circular economy. But what can we do right now to really supercharge this process? You know, what do you think is going to give us the maximum amount of impact? So with that in mind, I think it's really worth having a discussion. There's so much interesting information in the chat. So I'd love to pass it over to you. You've got the survey link as part of that QR code. We'd love you to share your insights. It's open for just over a month and a half. Please complete the survey, reach out to us if you need to. But all of this content that's in the chat, I'd love to see as part of the survey feedback. So with that in mind, I might pass it over for questions, and let's get down into detail.
Jeremy, I've noticed you've commented on a couple of the questions. Are there any that stand out that you want to dive into first? The point about additional industry opportunities, giving the example of Property Council Guide, Jared Healy put that forward. How do we make that happen?
That's a good question, and maybe Alison, you might want to take that on, because PCA is a member of ASBEC. Do you want to talk to that, Alison? I'm happy to jump in after.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of this capacity building, we absolutely recognise that there's already pockets of leadership throughout the ASBEC membership. And I'll just call out, say, the Australian Institute of Architects. You know, they're capacity building and their learning and development scheme that they're rolling out, that's what we're talking about. So what we want is that leadership in every segment, but we also want them to be saying the same thing. So we want the curriculum to be consistent. So yes, Property Council, definitely a guide for their members, and that guide would draw on something that is consistent and agreed upon.
And to that point, I think what we've suggested in some of the solutions is it's about guidance initially to provide common signals, to then to a point to when you might ratchet that up that says everyone's actually at a best practice or at a level that you could then start to see minimums or improved kind of outcomes from there. So as we know, this is a new space to many organisations, and so there is a bit of a journey to make sure that they're on the right trajectory and they know what embodied carbon means around the A1 to A5 upfront component, before we start getting into ratcheting up various guidance tools and requirement thresholds where we're still in a bit of a learning phase. The data's been gathered through the NABERS new tool that's just gone to pilot phase, so shout out to NABERS team there. So, we're in a very starting phase for that particular area. I was going to call out one other one that was in the messages, Hudson, around the conversation around EPDs, around cost to those. We've addressed that in the issues paper in some detail. We've also identified leading practice policy work in various jurisdictions that are incentivising and supporting the creation of both tools and the production of those EPDs. But it's also important to recognise that it's not just a one-off process. It's actually helping organisations understand that when they change their production processes, their inputs of materials, etc., it's actually helping them to determine the improved position of their low embodied carbon product. So it's important to recognise that it's not really just a one-off exercise. It's part of supporting their continuing improvement of their products. And a shout out to InfraBuild in terms of their new product that has been done and actually used their EPD process to help them validate their environmental impacts of those new products. So I think it's just recognising don't see it as a one-off. It's actually about how to utilise that in your processes as a supplier to actually inform improving that. So it's changing the nature of that language, but also recognising jurisdictions have seen that as a big gap that has needed help, and we've certainly flagged that in the issues paper in a number of different ways.
Can I ask you, on page 21 of the report, there's a table of saying, of the major countries that are acting on this, what they've done. Several aren't using EPDs. Some big countries, with big economies like France, closer to us, Singapore. What are they doing instead? And what did you find there?
It's quite hard to get clarity. Sometimes they're just silent on these things, and it's very hard to know what they're actually doing.
Yep.
There are some that are allowing other databases, and whether those databases have the rigor and credibility is hard to know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would be fair to say that the majority are heading for something like EPDs. And if you look at what NABERS are doing, yes, EPDs are like top of the pops. They're the best thing, but actually there are other options. So there are options for a third-party verified carbon footprint, according to ISO 14067, that conforms with the same kind of measurement boundaries associated with an EPD, for example. So there are other ways of tackling that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a question in there about, can we do kind of an EPD light of not having sort of so much detail? It depends on how the data is done. Actually, a lot of the calculators or LCA tools that are currently used to do EPDs, literally the difference between doing just carbon and doing a whole raft of EPDs is just clicking buttons for which indicators you want it to calculate, and then it goes and does the rest. So in terms of the content of an EPD, often there isn't a lot of difference in the effort. And the hardest bit is often actually being able to get the manufacturer able to get the data that is needed for it. There is something that we have also highlighted in the paper around We really need to be able to get economies of scale of manufacturers that make products in a similar way, being able to work together at an association level to be able to actually do EPDs in a more streamlined manner, where for each manufacturer it doesn't cost as much. And so we see that as also a really big lever towards being able to help particularly SMEs get EPDs in a cost-effective manner.
That might be something for you to chase up, Alison, as the organisation with all the peak bodies as your members.
I'll get them to work.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, can I come back to the education piece? Because obviously, you know, I've actually taken great offence at being described as a carbon nerd, Alison. You must have been speaking with my teenagers. But look, we are interested in carbon, obviously. We've volunteered for this. But clearly education, someone suggested schools. I love that idea. So that kids finishing the HSC are energy and carbon literate already. Wouldn't that be great? But there's education at so many parts of our ecosystem. Mekla's always talking ecosystem and systems thinking. Are you seeking input on the how and the who you could partner with? You know, TAFE, university, schools, master builders. Who do we want to talk to?
If you have ideas about that, we'd love to hear from you. And if there's anything that we can pilot to see what works and see how we can implement that at scale, I think that's a really good thing. What I'll also say is, you know, this project is, you know, for us, it's the start of a conversation. I think, you know, when we release the comprehensive policy framework, which will have, you know, my view is a series of roadmaps, there's going to be a lot more need to follow up, and it would probably create a stream of, okay, how are we going to do this for this space, this sector, and, you know, when are we going to do it? So with that in mind, and very also mindful that, you know, we've spoken in many different fora about, you know, carbon blinkers. We need to understand we're in a system. Sometimes we need to look at carbon, but what else do we need to factor in? What about nature? What about social? You know, what about our UN Sustainable Development Goals? So, you know, that's another big part of the picture. What's going to work now in terms of scaling up the measurement, but then what do we need to do next? And they're things that we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, I hope everybody's taking that down. Hey,
there's nothing bad about being a carbon nerd, Hudson. I think that's the most fabulous thing ever.
Excellent. I'll be writing a letter to the ABC suggesting that you go on to hard quiz with embodied carbon as your chosen topic. Hey, look, one of the questions put forward by Tom Petty, who's been a very active member of Mekla, talking about aligning with the finance sector. We know that ASBEC has a taxonomy underway. We know that mandatory reporting is coming in for carbon and climate disclosure. What has your research, what have your stakeholders told you about the need to align with finance? Who wants to go? We've had the tennis match of bouncing competing challenges. Who wants to answer this one?
Who wants to start?
Do you want to start? Look, I'm happy to start with it. Obviously, recognising there are a lot of initiatives underway, the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, and, you know, there's a push for green metals, and we've got a lot kind of happening there. What we've seen overseas is there's very much a connection to the sector that is that type of supply sector to the built environment, that's providing the right demand signal from the built environment and supporting investment signals to support that outcome. We have yet to really connect the dots between other sectors and the built environment's role that actually drives the demand of other sectors. And so some of the finance piece has yet to really join the dots as strongly, albeit it's in their initial drafting, highlighting the need to value embodied carbon reductions, but we actually needed to go one step deeper. We don't want it just at the project level. We need to understand how does actually the incentives support that at the product level? Because at the moment, it's kind of staying at the kind of level of, we want to support projects that deliver embodied carbon reduction outcomes, but we're not actually seeing a link to the level of support to the product manufacturing side of it to underpin that demand. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, and certainly some of the other incentive schemes overseas have really identified thresholds for various products and invest and providing mechanisms by which they're supported by finance schemes. And we probably need to join the dots more in that space. Nicole, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat, and Jason's asked specifically, could you see a carbon per square meter measure satisfy green finance? And like my answer is hell yes. Particularly once neighbours actually get to the point of having benchmarks. You know, hopefully that's this year, but I'm sure if it's not this year, it's very, very soon. When neighbours have benchmarks, neighbours' star ratings, I'm sure will be part of measures that can satisfy green finance, and that is all going to be based on carbon per square metre. But in the interim, there's absolutely no reason that this sort of measure can't be used as a KPI. It's just that there is a period that we're just going through right now where we need to establish what true benchmarks in Australia should be. We do have information from overseas. It is wide and varied. And we just need to understand how that sits contextually in Australia so that we don't make inappropriate assumptions that then cause undue burden for industry. We sort of want to hit that sweet spot of what's going to incentivise the most rapid change we can get without leaning into the ridiculous, where it's no longer commercially sensible to be pursuing that.
Jeremy, one of your favourite of the dilemmas was delivery, and I know you've got some dirty boots in the back of your shed from all of those projects you've worked on. The question from Simon about engineers not being willing to endorse materials or products that don't have detailed specifications and warranties. How do you respond to that? Because we know, MECLA discussions, the certifying engineer is often the barrier to an innovative material, and historically that's been the case for very good reasons. But it's still, it's still a rub. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and actually we workshopped that at a DBI event in Melbourne a while back, looking at kind of the prescriptive nature of standards to how do we shift to a performance-based kind of solution that helps to look at these innovative solutions. Obviously, there's been a start to that now for the non-concrete mixed designs in a new standard, but we're probably needing to broaden that when you start to think about other products that may not necessarily fit the mold of other standards, and how we get a greater adoption for those that are becoming greater opportunities. Example, whether that be hemp, bamboo, and others that are starting to actually emerge as significant opportunities for carbon reduction. But we don't have 30 years to go through the looking backwards to determine a standard for those products and look at performance-based things. And there are things happening in that space around the world. And we actually need to learn from those opportunities and look at ways in which to work with industry and research to actually help to validate those performance mechanisms, and not get maybe stuck in how we've established some of the criteria in past standards, which is basically, whatever the supplier's standard has been, it's kind of ended up being adopted as being the kind of the standard, if you like, and then anything outside of that's harder to apply. So I think we do need to do a bit more unpacking there. And it's tricky because obviously we want to make sure that we've got confidence on the delivery and durability of those products. But that has been, tackled elsewhere, and we need to kind of learn from those experiences as well. And Alison, if I missed anything that response?
No. I think it basically is adding on to what MECLA has been doing in this space. I think in relation to your focuses on the various materials, what we need to do is just continue injecting that knowledge and expertise and insight, supported by our research and academic community, to try to supercharge what's known. What I'll say is, in the infrastructure space, it's the bravery to for even say governments, again, as asset owners and project purchasers, to fund innovation at the very starting phase of a project, to actually incentivize that to happen at the outset, so that the solution, it isn't, people aren't just trying to adjust tender rules within a really constrained project brief. It's, you're incentivizing innovation at the outset. So I think hopefully once we start to break down some barriers and see some leadership in this space, we might be able to get more information about products and leverage what we know.
We are talking closely with DBI. Jeremy mentioned an event earlier this year. They have their conference coming up in November. Perhaps this could be, I know the agenda is being shaped now, but perhaps this could be a topic for that, the research part of the engineering profession, with some MECLA representatives to talk about the application part. All right, let's move on. Nicole, I notice you've put your hand up to answer a question around terminology, carbon or emissions. The question from Martin.
Absolutely. So one of the great challenges I think that we have in this space is that there's varying terminology that gets used, and quite often you'll see that it started with embodied emissions, which is a bit of a ubiquitous term because emissions means far more than just carbon. But when we use carbon, that is now the accepted vernacular for greenhouse gas. So all of the greenhouse gases, interestingly, including things like nitrous oxide, which has no carbon in it, but anything that's assigned a greenhouse gas CO2 equivalency value gets captured in what we call carbon emissions. And so, yeah, that is just a generic one, and it will cover everything. And yes, carbon certainly includes the carbon dioxide equivalency of refrigerant gases and that sort of thing as well.
Okay. A nice simple question, probably with a rather complex answer though. Why do we still have high carbon concrete being produced?
Look, it's easy to think that it's just laziness, that it's just being stuck with the dinosaurs. It's not actually quite true. So there are different issues that need to be tackled. For example, when we're talking about industrial warehouses, we now need to have, because of automation in warehouses, we need beautiful, pure slabs with a very smooth surface in large warehouses. And at the moment, what we hear from builders who actually need to deliver this stuff is it's hard to have high SCM or supplementary cementitious material content in those slabs. The other thing is, if you're using a high SCM concrete, it can actually take longer to cure to strength. And because of that, it changes the way that we need to build. We can't just assume that we're going to quickly cure and keep going all the time. We need to change the way that we schedule our activities. And I don't think that's impossible. I think it takes thinking outside the box. But at the moment, it's kind of pushing our envelope a little bit in what we're comfortable with in construction. Jeremy, did you want to add anything to that as our construction expert?
Well, I actually want to challenge it because to date, what's happened is, yep, those other products take you a little bit more effort and maybe cost them more to actually produce because the volume of requests are less. So the scale kind of represents the price you pay based on volumes delivered. However, if I look at an example from a few years ago when Laminex realised that everyone was starting to request and procure EO board rather than their less environmentally responsible product E1 board, they actually flipped it. And so that if you wanted the product that had a high environmental impact and not as good, they actually made it more expensive to buy that and their other product that they were yet to really get the volume for, but had started to see the signals. They actually priced that at a cheaper than the real cost to make it. So they actually flipped it, and it's really they have put their own carbon value on their own. If in example terms, they're trying to put another higher value on that not so good product to actually get a driver into their lower carbon product. So can that actually occur? Absolutely, but it's a kind of a tricky signal of we don't want to lose market supply, but we are seeing in many jurisdictions where they have available cementitious replacement content, they can actually already get that as a no-cost supply for a certain level of percentage replacement. And we need to see that as business as usual, as the offering, rather than seeing that as offered up if someone wants to pay a little bit more. It's almost like, how do we actually support and flip that and put that value in that carbon pricing? And that's tricky when the rest of the sector, and including policies at the moment, don't actually represent a value to that carbon cost.
Absolutely. And as Martin pointed out in the chat, and I just want to expand on a little bit, geography has a large role to play in this as well. The use of SCMs is quite often confined to where they are most available. And we saw this working with neighbours on looking at emission factors for concretes. The highest emission concretes are actually in the Northern Territory, I think. They're the places where it's harder to get these SCMs to market to be in the batching of the concrete. And therefore, they tend to be higher cement content and therefore higher carbon concretes as well.
One of the suggestions in the chat is what if we were to adopt a method of rating like the Heart Foundation? So the heart tick, if I'm buying food for the kids in the supermarket and it's got the heart tick, yep, Dad's job is done, goes in the trolley. Slightly simpler than all of the different performance parameters required for the cement input to concrete that you're talking, Jeremy. But, conceptually, what do you think? What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, actually, that's what we mentioned in the solutions paper about a carbon mark, similar to a watermark. So, and recognizing a label that actually recognizes low carbon products to make it simple and easy for everyone to know what actually is the right type of product to utilize. And at the moment, we don't have that in place, but we absolutely see that as an opportunity, particularly rather than trying to tackle it at every builder side of it. It's like tackling at the complete supply angle of that whole product supply chain. So yeah, absolutely. That's why we suggested the carbon mark example that has a reputable scheme that actually could provide and support kind of thresholds that are not dissimilar to that kind of methodology. Alison?
What I would add to that, thanks, Jez, is to do in terms of time frame. So that's a fantastic idea, but what do we need to occur before that happens? Do we need data? Do we need a comprehensive understanding of the products that we have? Do we need more and better EPDs across a vast array of materials? So, thinking about sequencing, what needs to happen, and you're our brains trust, what needs to happen to make that mark valid and understandable and comprehensive.
Okay. Hey, there's a lot in the chat around low carbon concrete and warehouses, and Monica has rightly pointed out that we have a nutcracker coming up. That is a hard nut to crack. So we are setting up an event specifically called a nutcracker for that reason. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing the outputs of that and then sharing that with the industry. It sounds as though education is going to be a huge part. Delighted that your opening comment, Alison, that you're building on so much work of others, but it seems also you're juggling as well as reading and writing at the same time, because I've seen James Elks from product development from Neighbours in the chat. Neighbours its tool is about to go, and I saw the three of you at the Neighbours conference celebrating 25 years just last week. What are the next steps? I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left of this. Yes, you want people's input from the survey. This, I think there's probably another chapter to be written now that I've seen all of the comments from this call. What's happening next, guys? What can we expect?
With that in mind, so we'll get all of your intel up until the 26th of July. That's when we need to really get our nuts cracking, and we are hoping to get this comprehensive policy framework ready by November this year. So really that's, I'm excited. I know there's the DBI conference in November, so hopefully we'll have more to share there. But there's a lot more work that we need to do, and very much informed by what you tell us as part of the survey. Lots of conversations. It's exciting, you know, because this is happening concurrently with neighbours piloting the measurement tool. So it's this beautiful synchronicity about work happening in the sector, and really excited to see where this framework takes us. And lots more work to do. That's all I can say.
Nicole, any final comments?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this briefly in the presentation, but I think the biggest barrier to progress right now is there are so many things we could do. And if we try to do everything, we will actually achieve very little on each one of them. So getting your responses to this survey to really narrow our focus onto what really matters, in your opinion, will be incredibly helpful. Because when we want to, you know, offer policy recommendations to government at the end of this year, we want it to be crisp, we want it to be clear, we want it to be transformative. And if we give them 100 things to do, then they'll probably not be able to achieve very much with that. So just help us get clarity and focus, please. You're the experts. We need you.
We're the carbon nerds, so yes.
That's right. Go
Jeremy,
nerds.
Jeremy, your
Yeah, look,
thoughts.
I think it is all about a collaboration. As we've identified, there's a lot of things happening out there, and they're not so joined up at the moment. And in an Australian context, we need to bring that together to go, how do we advance to get the scale and deepen action without going off in 10 different directions? We've got 8 different federal departments talking about decarbonisation. You've got various states leading the charge, and industry moving forward, as well as MECLA. How do we actually bring all of that together to actually really deepen the traction that we want to see in embodied carbon action for upfront carbon? And so that's all about kind of the next steps for this policy work to go, what's going to be the most impactful? How do we actually make it happen? How do we make others listen and understand that this is the consensus of the industry, and support change to actually really adopt you know, low carbon solutions more broadly in the industry?
Brilliant. All right. So action item, get onto the survey and have your say. That's the key message for today. To our speakers, Alison Scotland, Jeremy Mansfield, and Nicole Sullivan, carbon nerds, all three of you, thank you very much for your time, for all of the work that's gone into this, but also an enjoyable, accessible presentation on, you know, pretty meaty content. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us and contributing to the chat. That really was a really high level of engagement, and plenty for our ASBEC colleagues to run with. So thank you very much. Do follow up with the survey. Obviously, that's our homework, but that's our chance to contribute. A big thank you to Kati Verheyen from Climate Kick, who has brought this event together and keeps our secretariat working with her colleague, Alexi Barnstone. Thank you, Kati. As always, I like to express my thanks to Monica Richter from WWF for her insights, optimism, and determination. That's what keeps MECLA moving. Please keep an eye out on LinkedIn for updates, MECLA updates, and relevant industry happenings. Our newsletter went out last week. If you didn't get that, jump onto our website and sign up. For now, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hudson.